Picture a lone wolf standing at the edge of a forest, neither part of the pack nor entirely separate from it. This image, ancient and archetypal, captures something essential about a particular kind of human being. The Sigma INFJ exists in this liminal space, a figure who embodies the rarest combination of traits known to personality psychology. While INFJs themselves constitute only 1 to 3% of the population, already making them the rarest of the 16 Myers-Briggs types. The Sigma INFJ represents something even more unusual. They are the outsiders among outsiders, the wanderers who have chosen solitude not from weakness but from a profound understanding of their own nature. To comprehend why Sigma INFJs are so extraordinarily rare, we must journey into the depths of what makes them distinct, exploring the convergence of psychological traits, social positioning, and archetypal identity that creates this singular personality. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and for the Sigma INFJ, this becoming requires walking a path that few can even perceive, let alone follow. The question is not simply why they are rare, but why their very existence challenges our conventional understanding of personality itself. The foundation of the Sigma INFJ's rarity lies in a paradox that most people never encounter within themselves. INFJs possess an intrinsic contradiction, a cognitive architecture that pulls them simultaneously towards deep connection with others and profound withdrawal into solitude. They are empaths who feel the emotional currents of every room they enter, intuitives who perceive patterns and meanings invisible to most. Yet they are also individuals who require extensive time alone to process the overwhelming input their sensitivity provides. This is the first layer of their rarity. Now add the Sigma element, the archetype of the lone wolf who operates outside traditional hierarchies, neither seeking to lead nor to follow, who finds power in autonomy rather than social positioning. The Sigma personality type, derived from socio-sexual hierarchy theory, describes an individual who exists parallel to the conventional social ladder. Unlike alphas, who dominate through social positioning, or betas, who support and follow, Sigmas chart their own course entirely. They are self-sufficient, independent, and fundamentally uninterested in the games of social status that consume so many others. When you combine this with the INFJ's already rare cognitive functions, you create something almost mythologically uncommon. The Sigma INFJ must possess not only the INFJ's cognitive stack of introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing, but also the psychological resilience to resist all social pressure to conform, to lead, or to follow. They must be comfortable in a state of permanent outsiderness, finding their identity not in relation to others but in relation to themselves and their own internal compass. Consider what this means in practical terms. From childhood, most humans are socialized into hierarchical thinking. We learn where we fit, whether we are leaders or followers, popular or overlooked, insiders or outsiders. Even those who rebel against these structures are often reacting to them, defining themselves in opposition to them. The Sigma INFJ, however, must develop an entirely different relationship with social reality. They must recognize the hierarchies, understand them with their characteristic insight, yet remain fundamentally unmoved by them. This requires a level of psychological integration that most people never achieve. Jung spoke of individuation, the process by which a person becomes their true self, differentiated from the collective. For the Sigma INFJ, individuation is not optional. It is the very ground of their being. They cannot function otherwise. This is why they are so rare. The psychological conditions necessary for a Sigma INFJ to emerge are extraordinarily specific. First, the person must be born with or develop the INFJ cognitive style, which is already a statistical rarity. Then, through some combination of temperament, experience, and conscious choice, they must develop the Sigma's independence and self-sufficiency. This usually requires either exceptional self-awareness from an early age or experiences that force them to question and ultimately reject conventional social positioning. Many INFJs, feeling their natural sensitivity and desire for harmony, adapt by becoming excellent at reading and responding to social dynamics. They may become counselors, mediators, or supportive presences in their communities. The Sigma INFJ, however, takes a different path. They recognize that true authenticity requires distance from the social games that others play. They see through the performances, the status-seeking, the endless jockeying for position, and they choose to step aside from it entirely. This choice, or perhaps this necessity, creates a profound loneliness that paradoxically becomes the source of their power. Nietzsche wrote of those who must stand alone, who create their own values rather than accepting the values of the herd. The Sigma INFJ embodies this philosophy not through arrogance but through quiet necessity. They discover that their deepest insights come not from social interaction but from solitary contemplation. They realize that their empathy, rather than binding them more closely to others, actually requires them to maintain distance to avoid being overwhelmed. This is the second layer of their rarity. While many people experience loneliness as a wound to be healed through connection, the Sigma INFJ experiences solitude as their natural habitat, the place where they are most fully themselves. This does not mean they lack connection or love. On the contrary, Sigma INFJs often form intensely deep bonds with a select few individuals who understand and accept their nature. But these connections exist outside the typical social structures. They are not networked into larger communities. They do not serve to raise the social status of Sigma INFJs or integrate them into groups. They are pure, direct, and chosen with extraordinary care. The Sigma INFJ's relationships are like the relationships between stars in a sparse constellation. Each connection meaningful precisely because it is not part of a denser cluster. This selectivity, this refusal to accumulate acquaintances or casual friendships, further isolates them statistically. While other personality types might know hundreds of people casually, the Sigma INFJ might genuinely know only a handful, creating a social footprint so light as to be almost invisible. The cognitive demands of being a Sigma INFJ contribute significantly to their rarity. Introverted intuition, the dominant function of the INFJ, operates by perceiving patterns, connections, and underlying meanings that are not immediately apparent. It is a function oriented towards the future, towards possibility, towards the abstract rather than the concrete. When combined with the Sigma's independence, this creates a person who is constantly synthesizing information from multiple domains. Seeing connections that others miss, yet having no institutional framework within which to express or validate these insights. Unlike academic researchers or corporate strategists who can channel their intuitive insights through established structures, the Sigma INFJ must trust their own perceptions without external validation. This requires an almost superhuman level of self-trust. They must be willing to see what they see, know what they know, and act on that knowledge even when no one else confirms it. This is the territory of the mystic, the artist, the independent thinker who operates outside mainstream institutions. Throughout history, such individuals have been rare, not because the capacity for independent insight is necessarily uncommon, but because the psychological strength to stand by one's perceptions in the absence of social confirmation is exceedingly rare. The Sigma INFJ must develop this strength not through choice but through necessity. Their introverted intuition shows them truths that others do not see, and their Sigma nature prevents them from seeking validation through social consensus. They are trapped, in a sense, by their own clarity of vision, forced into independence by the very gifts that make them unique. The mythological resonance of the Sigma INFJ helps us understand why they appear so rarely in human populations. In Greek mythology, Chiron was a centaur, but unlike other centaurs who were violent and chaotic, Chiron was wise, healing, and civilized. He existed between worlds, neither entirely beast nor fully god, neither part of centaur society nor part of human or divine society. He was the wounded healer, the teacher of heroes, yet he remained fundamentally alone. The Sigma INFJ occupies a similar archetypal position. They possess the gifts of insight, empathy, and wisdom, yet these very gifts set them apart from others. They can understand others profoundly yet remain largely misunderstood. They can guide and heal, yet they do so from a position of outsiderness rather than from within established healing professions or social roles. This betweenness, this liminality, is essential to their nature. Victor Turner, the anthropologist, wrote extensively about liminal figures, those who exist at the threshold between categories. Liminal figures are powerful precisely because they are undefined by conventional structures, yet they are also vulnerable because they lack the protections those structures provide. The Sigma INFJ lives permanently in this liminal space. They are too sensitive and insightful to be conventional, too independent to be part of the helping professions in traditional ways. Too self-sufficient to need the validation of hierarchies, yet too engaged with meaning and human nature to be simple hermits. This combination of traits creates a psychological profile that can only emerge under very specific conditions, making them vanishingly rare in the general population. Another dimension of the Sigma INFJ's rarity relates to the developmental path required to become one. Most personality types can function adequately without extensive self-examination or psychological work. A person can be a functional ESTJ, ISFP, or ENTP simply by following their natural preferences and adapting to social expectations to some extent. The Sigma INFJ, however, cannot function without doing profound inner work. Their sensitivity means they absorb enormous amounts of emotional and social information. Without the ability to process this information, they would become overwhelmed and dysfunctional. Their independence requires them to develop unusually strong internal structures of meaning and value, as they cannot rely on external structures to the same degree as others. This means the Sigma INFJ must, almost by necessity, engage in what Jung called shadow work. The process of confronting and integrating the unconscious aspects of the personality. They must understand their own darkness, their own capacity for manipulation through their insight, their own potential for narcissism disguised as wisdom. Without this integration, an INFJ's gifts can become tools of self-deception or subtle control. The Sigma element demands even more, requiring the person to confront their need for validation, their desire for belonging, and their fear of isolation. Ultimately transcending these needs through deep acceptance of their solitary nature. This level of psychological development is not common. Most people live relatively unexamined lives, following the scripts provided by their culture, family, and social position. The Sigma INFJ cannot do this. Their nature demands examination, integration, and conscious choice at every turn. This requirement acts as a filter, ensuring that only those with both the capacity and the will to do this work will fully develop into Sigma INFJs. The intellectual and creative output of Sigma INFJs, while often profound, typically remains less visible than the work of more socially integrated types, further contributing to their perceived rarity. Because they operate outside institutional frameworks, their insights may be expressed through independent writing, art, or one-on-one mentoring rather than through academic papers, corporate strategies, or mass media. They are the therapists who see a handful of clients and transform lives without ever becoming famous. They are the writers who publish quietly, building small but devoted readerships. They are the thinkers whose ideas circulate through informal networks rather than through prestigious institutions. This invisibility is not a failure. It is a feature of their nature. The Sigma INFJ has no interest in self-promotion or platform building for its own sake. They share their insights when they feel compelled to do so, when the insight itself demands expression. Still, they do not engage in the marketing, networking, and status building that amplifies most creative work in modern society. This means that even when Sigma INFJs exist and contribute meaningfully to the world, they remain largely unknown, creating the impression that they are even rarer than they actually are. They are the hidden figures, the unseen influences, the quiet catalysts whose impact is felt primarily by those fortunate enough to encounter them directly. In a culture that equates visibility with value and platform size with importance, the Sigma INFJ's natural invisibility means their contributions are chronically undervalued and their existence underestimated. They are rare not only in absolute numbers but in cultural recognition, existing in the margins of collective awareness despite the depth of their insight and the quality of their character. The final element that makes Sigma INFJs so exceptionally rare is the sheer difficulty of sustaining this identity over a lifetime. Being a Sigma INFJ is not a static state but a continuous practice, a daily choice to honor one's nature despite the pressures to conform, to join, to compromise. The modern world is not designed for people who require extensive solitude, who operate outside of hierarchies, and who refuse to perform for social approval. Every system, from education to employment to social life, assumes and rewards participation in collective structures. The Sigma INFJ must constantly navigate a world that does not recognize or accommodate their needs. They must find ways to earn a living that allow for autonomy and solitude, which often means unconventional career paths or financial insecurity. They must manage relationships with people who cannot understand why they are so often alone, why they do not seek advancement or recognition, why they seem content with obscurity. They must resist the internalized voices that tell them something is wrong with them, that they should be more social, more ambitious, more visible. This resistance requires constant energy and commitment. Many people who might have the temperament to be Sigma INFJs instead compromise, adapting themselves to more conventional patterns because the cost of complete authenticity seems too high. They may retain some INFJ characteristics or some Sigma tendencies, but they do not fully inhabit the identity because doing so would require sacrifices they are not willing to make. Only those with an almost stubborn commitment to authenticity, combined with the resources and circumstances that make such a life possible, can sustain the Sigma INFJ identity over the course of decades. This winnowing process, operating continuously across the lifespan, ensures that true Sigma INFJs remain exceptionally rare, perhaps representing not just a fraction of a percent of INFJs, but a fraction of a percent of the already tiny INFJ population, making them one of the rarest psychological profiles in existence. When we step back and survey the whole picture, the rarity of Sigma INFJs appears not as an accident but as an inevitability. They represent the convergence of multiple rare traits, each of which independently occurs in only a small percentage of people. They require the INFJ cognitive style, which is already rare. They need the Sigma's psychological independence and immunity to social hierarchies, which is also uncommon. They require the developmental maturity to integrate their shadow and build strong internal structures of meaning, which only a fraction of people achieve. They require circumstances that allow them to sustain this identity rather than compromising it for survival or comfort, which depends on numerous external factors. And they require the visibility to be recognized as Sigma INFJs, which their very nature makes unlikely. Each of these requirements acts as a filter. And when you compound their effects, you arrive at a personality type so rare that most people will never encounter one knowingly in their entire lives. Yet the Sigma INFJ exists, not as a fantasy or aspiration, but as a real psychological configuration that emerges when specific conditions align. They walk among us as the unnoticed philosophers, the invisible healers, the quiet witnesses to human nature in all its complexity. They are the ones who understand without explaining, who see without judging, who live according to an internal compass so finely calibrated that external guidance becomes unnecessary. In a world increasingly characterized by performance, visibility, and collective identity, the Sigma INFJ represents something ancient and essential. The solitary seeker who finds truth not in consensus but in the depths of their own carefully examined experience. Their rarity is not a problem to be solved but a reflection of how demanding this path truly is. How few are called to it, and how few still are capable of walking it all the way to the end. The Sigma INFJ stands as a reminder that not all value can be measured, not all wisdom can be institutionalized, and not all important lives are visible ones. In their scarcity lies their significance, and in their solitude lies a form of freedom that most people can barely imagine, let alone achieve. They are rare because what they embody is rare, not the capacity for insight or independence alone, but the willingness to pay the full price that such a life demands, to live always between worlds, always slightly apart, always seeing just a bit more clearly than those around them, and to accept that clarity as both gift and burden, both privilege and exile, both blessing and curse. This is why Sigma INFJs are the rarest personality type, not because they are superior to others, but because they represent a path so narrow, so demanding, and so unrewarded by conventional measures that only a handful in every generation will find themselves walking it. Fewer still will have the strength to keep walking when the path disappears entirely and only their own inner knowing remains to guide them forward.